Hey there, CX Passport travelers. This week is going to be a little different. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to record a LinkedIn Live with Sam Stern, where we talked about what is Southwest thinking with all the changes that they have done to their overall experience. So this week, enjoy the replay of that LinkedIn Live. Customer experience wisdom, a dash of travel talk. We've been cleared for takeoff.
The best meals are served outside and require a passport.
Thank you, everybody, for joining this improv. As you can tell, incredibly impromptu. What the heck is Southwest thinking? And all of this stems from the announcement yesterday that Southwest Airlines has, amongst many other recent changes, one of the biggest was now you got to pay for your bags. They have to pay for bag fees. And along with the venting that I wanted to do inside my own house, I thought, who better to bring into a conversation than to bring Sam Stern, one of the customer experience people that I value the most, value his reasoned thinking as opposed to perhaps my emotional hot-headedness as we go through really across three dimensions. I wanted to consider this as how we think of this as customers, how we think of this as CX people, and maybe try to get into the head of those who are making the actual decisions for folks. Can't explain that, but maybe we'll try. First, Sam, for those, I can't imagine, but for those who don't know you, who are you?
Yeah. Thanks, Rick. So I work at LinkedIn.
You have gone silent on me.
Oh.
User
Can
error.
you hear me?
I can. User error on my side. Carry on.
Oh, okay. Great. So for those who don't know me, I lead the service design team at LinkedIn. So we're on LinkedIn, this LinkedIn Live, and I work at LinkedIn. And we are creating better experiences for our 1 billion members and customers, and also for our colleagues, for employees at LinkedIn. And I've been doing customer experience for 20 years or so. I was at New Balance before this and at Forrester Research before that in their customer experience practice. And that's where Rick and I met long ago. So we've sort of been off and on in touch since then. And yes, I have flown Southwest. I have covered Southwest. I have written about how they stand out and are unique within the airline industry. So, if I have to go back now and redo some of the things I've written in the past, is like the most selfish reaction I have to this news, because it's like they're no longer unique and differentiated in their industry the way they were.
No, I definitely. Now, one thing you didn't mention though, Sam, unless I missed it when you were on, when I was glitching, you've got a brilliant podcast as well. I want to hear about it.
Thank you. We're both podcasters. So CX Patterns and is my weekly podcast, and potentially this conversation will be dropping in the feed at some point.
With a highly edited beginning of this, we're going to be able to do that. Yeah, Sam, it is funny to think how many decades ago it was that you and I met. And just for those that don't know me, I'm Rick Denton. I'm the host of CX Passport. I too have a podcast. I also co-host a podcast with my wife about empty nest life. But that that is relevant here. But that podcast is called The Loud Quiet if you are living that empty nest life as well. Sam, let's do that. Let's start. Your thoughts as a customer. You started to talk about it as a CX professional. I definitely want to hear about that. But just as a customer of Southwest, what did you feel when you first heard this news?
Yeah, so it's been coming, I would say, even though they denied it months ago that they would ever get rid of the bags fly free policy, right? That you get two free checked bags. And let me give you my perspective from someone who is not their target market. I live in Boston. They don't have a lot of routes from here. Mm-hmm. Delta and JetBlue have the most, and I like Delta and JetBlue. And I fly mostly on those two airlines and don't love Southwest. So for me, I was looking at it thinking, hey, they're introducing features like I never check bags, so I don't care about check bags free. I like getting an assigned seat. So they're doing things that make them more in line for me to be their customer. And I still think it's a huge mistake, because I still won't prefer them to Delta when I fly out of Boston, because Delta, I think, still has a better passenger experience for me as the target customer. And so I think that is a good example of where they are so muddling who they're for and what their differentiation is, that they're doing things that make them more appealing to someone like me, and yet making me and people like me, I would guess, no more likely to fly with Southwest, to choose Southwest.
Yeah. That differentiation thing is something that I think we're going to talk a little bit more about. the feeling, see, for me, I am a Target Southwest customer.
Yeah.
I live in Dallas. It is a part of the Dallas heritage, right? That's part of our lore. It's it was an employer of choice for the longest time. In fact, they were well known for paying below market salaries because they were viewed as an employer of choice. People wanted that brand associated with their career history. And as a customer, I felt betrayed.
Yeah.
It was on when I saw that, I actually felt that same sort of betrayal that I might have felt from the spurning of a high school girlfriend. It really was that kind of at the emotion layer. There's a lot of functional things, but when a brand has touted itself as bags fly free, a brand has said, this is who we are and why we're different and why you should be a part of us, I bought in. And there were, for the longest time, there were a lot of folks that I fired another Dallas-based airline from my domestic business. And I was mocked. Yeah, I think I'll say that. I was mocked by many of my other business colleagues for doing so because of things that were perhaps not as business-oriented. There was no first class, no upgrades, open seating, that sort of thing. But I bought into the brand, the friendliness, the bags fly free. I loved that aspect of it. And when they changed it, it was like they said, Rick, we don't care about you. And they said that to millions of Ricks around the country.
100%. And that's why I was framing it like I was, is they're breaking up with Rick times, millions, and they're not making themselves more appealing to Sam and the millions like me who have preferences with other airlines. As you're talking about the other Dallas-based airline, American Airlines, I assume is who it is we're talking about, right? I
try not to say their name out loud, but yes.
Yeah. But just to be specific, they're not quaking in their boots here because Southwest is going to have assigned seats and not do checked bags. Right. I just don't see what purpose this serves other than to remove what's differentiating about them. And you see a lot of people talking about it, generate a lot of bad press. And for days now, I think it's going to go on. I think this story is going to run for days because there won't be an explanation. And without a close to the story, it remains open. People trying to understand what has happened here.
I think I like that you said that there's not a close to the story. I am going to bring us back to that at the end of this. There's something that's sitting in my head that you just triggered with me. I think a lot of us feel like we know what that story is. And in the absence of any direct information, we assume that it is the active investor and their horde of business analysts that have come in and said that you can make $1 billion on extra revenue through this. And that might be true. And I know this is where then people look at CXers and say, well, see, y'all just care about the fuzzies, but we care actually about making profit. I don't know how well they took into account what the backlash and the lack of differentiation will be. For me, I'm an A-list preferred. I get better seating. I get that sort of thing. And in fact, I think in the new model, I'll even get at least one bag free. Great. But my kids don't. Yeah. My spouse doesn't. And my kids who are, one used to be and one still is, away at college, there would be times that we actually chose a less convenient flight option with Southwest because we knew that she would get her bags free. And we knew that, at least in theory, that legacy Southwest service approach would be offered to her. Now,
100%.
I'm going to take a more convenient flight.
Yeah. And honestly, I think that's such a good example of where short-term focus on that incremental revenue you get from the bag fee, you lose that differentiation that would get you college students who are flying away from home to college and where the 2 bags free means a lot to them.
Oh, yeah.
And establishes them at a point where they're just starting to make, purchasing decisions on their own, especially around something like who they fly with. That would cement loyalty that could last for 30 or 40 years. Yeah. And you're throwing that away right now.
Ooh, what a great point. And I think we're weaving into, how do we think of this from a customer experience perspective? Those of us that have been in that world for a while. But that's a great point. There's a reason why banks spend or probably use college checking accounts as a loss leader. But they know that hooking in a college kid who that might be their very first bank for credit cards. That may be their very first credit card, tends to cement a loyalty. I am still with a legacy bank that I signed up for when I was in college.
Me too.
It's not the best option for me. But
Me too.
Lord have mercy, I'm not leaving them. Way too hard, way too sticky.
No, 100%. And now, easier to switch who you fly with, but I think the point still stands. If they create that value proposition that's appealing to you at that age when you're looking for your first airline that you would actually fly with, that can be persuasive long past the time when it's still every $20 increment of savings to you is worth everything because you're pinching pennies to have enough money for late night ramen in college, right?
Well, I'm glad to hear that yours is focused on ramen. There were plenty of time that perhaps I used a different sort of nutrition that might have been a different, a lower grade level of nutrition.
We were both carbo loading, right?
Yeah, it just happened to have hops instead of noodles. So,
right.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about this more deeper from a customer experience perspective. That lack of differentiation. I actually want to ask you this, and I'm asking myself this, but I'm asking you first so I have time to think about it. I'm cheating. What about the people that would say to you and me, look, guys, I get it, but this is what the U.S. airline industry is. This is what customers are voting for. They're going that direction, so they don't really care. You guys are going to be all tempest in a teapot, but come talk to me 9 months from now. What do you say to those folks?
I hear that, right? That you're seeing. So the trend since the pandemic really abated was everyone wanted to get back to traveling, and there was much more of this premium leisure market. And I'm no travel expert, so this is just me observing or reading about what was happening, that people were willing to pay for first class out of their own pockets rather than it only being a corporate traveler who would do that, which when you're at Southwest and you probably aren't winning that much on the corporate business, could be an appealing target. The problem is when you go into that space, instead of owning the low-cost space that in the way that Southwest did, you're now competing against very well-established brands that are your few peers, at least in terms of customer experience in the airline industry. So I'm talking about Delta and JetBlue, who are usually right up there with Southwest in terms of customer scores and have better premium product than Southwest does. So how you're playing on their turf rather than on your own turf. And I think Southwest is one of those great examples of where you turn a niche into the whole thing, right? They started out, as you were alluding to, just flying within Texas because that was a way to skirt the regulations on discounting, on prices.
Right.
Then they expanded in this sort of like flying bus way where they made all these stops along the country. But then they kept a lot of the things that allowed them to be low cost, the open boarding, that they could turn planes faster. The bags flying free was something for people who were really on a budget to fly with them and pick them. And they were the biggest domestic airline by people flown. So to say that they didn't have a market, I think really is just not true. And so to say now you're abandoning what was the biggest niche in the market, at least in the US, for something else that is going to be certainly has fewer passengers and now maybe each more revenue for each of them and maybe there's more profit there, but not, you have to win that market because it's already hotly contested by several, I would say, pretty strong airline brands.
The lack of, exactly, Sam, and that legacy aspect of it, and it just had that sort of that culture, that view that's who I'm going to be. Now, Andrew's asked a pretty good question in the chat, and I don't know what kind of visibility you've got on your end there, but the idea of maybe Southwest said, hey, if somebody cares that much about $25, $30, $40 for a bag, we don't want them around. And what does that look like? And that idea of maybe they have an opportunity for an elevated experience. I've got some views here, but I'll cheat a little and I'll ask you.
So if someone is that price sensitive, we don't want them.
Are they firing the customer in the hopes that they can replace it with a new set of customers?
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that, right? Because to pair this with the first change they made recently was assigned seating in terms of a big change to the experience, right? And that to me is for people like me who want to pick their seat, who do not want that stress of boarding a Southwest flight, which for me is that I find it stressful, even when I'm in the A group of not knowing whether I'll get a good seat. And now it could even be that I get a better seat than I would have gotten with a assigned seat, but I know what seat I'm getting, at least in that instance. I think you're firing a set of customers who you built the largest domestic airline brand with for a set of customers who, yes, might be more profitable and less price sensitive, but who you don't know you can win. What is the value proposition? Again, I keep saying this, but what is the value proposition to someone who is less price sensitive to fly Southwest? I think of them as a budget brand. I think of them as having fewer perks on board in terms of the quality of the flying experience than Delta or JetBlue, who are the dominant carriers in my market. So the ones I always reflexively fly with, they have a better product. So why would I switch to Southwest? What would get me to switch? I can't see what it would be.
You know, it's sticking in my head here. There's a story. And for those that are Dallas based, you're going to know this story. And many of us lived it. And it's very similar. It's when an activist investor came into JCPenney and completely gutted, no, I'll say it this way, chose to fire the JCPenney customer. And they were going to elevate JCPenney to a brand experience that was notches and perhaps stories and buildings above what JCPenney's brand promise had been for, well, actually, technically, over a century.
Yeah.
And in doing so, they did not know their customer well enough and fired her when they said, hey, we're going to give you straight line pricing. We're getting rid of discounting. We're getting rid of that. We're being honest. We're being transparent. They're using all of these great words without understanding that that customer cared about the game. They wanted to feel like they got a deal. They knew it was a game. These aren't dummies. They knew. And so they fired the customer, didn't have the cash able to then elevate the brand. And actually, here locally, they had to sell off a bunch of really high value property just to be able to make the business operate. And that, to me, is what I worry about Southwest, is they think, hey, we can get rid of our Herb Kelleher styled customer who loves the fun, the spirit, the energy of the Southwest culture. And the perception of value, and let's be honest, Southwest flights aren't always the cheapest, but the perception that I'm getting a better value in the hopes that they're going to like an experience that's similar to what the other U.S. carriers are. I don't think that's happening. To me, what I think has happened is Southwest has, in the race to the bottom of what U.S. airline experience is, they've strapped on cinder block tennis shoes and are racing as quickly as to that bottom of the lake as they can.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it's a great analogy to the JCPenney example, right? Because they tried to be, they even brought in Ron Johnson from Apple and tried to emulate Apple stores. Well, I mean, I think it would take 2 decades for their brand perception to change enough for that to happen. And as you said, they didn't have the cash on hand. They couldn't play that long game to let perceptions catch up with their new reality. It was never going to work. They couldn't play in that market the way they had played in the discount market. And I think the other thing that's striking to me about that example to this one is I think they misunderstood their customers in a way that is just inexcusable from a customer experience perspective, but like to just think they were interested in low prices rather than in that thrill of the hunt for the bargain, as you were alluding to. You misunderstood what they care about. Yes, they want a low price. They want to think, though, that they earned that low price by finding this great item on this great deal. And to me, there's something about Southwest where it's like, you were alluding to this too, is it isn't actually the lowest cost airline, and it's not the airline with the fewest frills. We have Spirit, we have Frontier.
Right.
It is the airline where they have just gotten the mix right of charging you for things you want to pay for and not charging you for things you don't want to pay for, and making it feel like you're getting a good deal in that value equation. That is gone.
Yes, and that feel is what I think is at the root of all this, and I think they are going to find that they misjudged the feel aspect of it. I think we're starting to see some signs of that. I want to see if I can pull this off. I'm thinking of this from a customer experience, right? You and I are talking about perhaps the pricing, the service experience inside the plane itself, but the brand is part of the entire customer experience.
Yes.
I thought it was odd that I received this email today, and I'm going to see if I can talk and present at the same time. It is. I'm getting all sorts of tips that are telling me what not to, to show. This. Southwest is inviting me the day after that they have told me that they don't give a flying flip about me as a customer. They are inviting me to refer my friends to the Southwest co-branded credit card. Now, is this actually technically Chase Bank's customer journey? Is it Southwest? Who's driving this? But this to me is another example of how I'm worried about the overall understanding of the Southwest customer experience when a promotion like this would be released the day after such incredibly negative news. There's no way, there aren't enough bonus points to get me to want to refer a friend to Southwest right now.
This will be their worst performing credit card promotion in a long time.
I have to imagine.
And I really hope they don't wonder why. It would be my only thing. Right? I can guarantee it will be their lowest performer, and they better think, okay, we kind of knew the timing of that was going to make it hard. The other thing I'll tell you, so you think about the larger brand perception and something like that, right? Where it's like, well, suddenly people who were loyal, happy to recommend you, love the points, but happy to recommend, hey, get a Southwest credit card because you get the perks, you get to A-list faster. Like, this is worth it. It's a great airline. You want to fly with them. Now wouldn't recommend that. I'll tell you another one that I always found so striking is when I was at Forrester, one of the things we did a lot of customer research, and we saw that customers believed that Southwest and JetBlue had the best on-time performance among the airlines.
Interesting.
And they don't. And what it was a goodwill benefit to save you operational costs. You don't actually have to be as operationally efficient if customers like you and will give you the benefit of the doubt. Southwest is throwing away that kind of goodwill that earns them the benefit of the doubt. And so suddenly they will actually have to be better with on-time performance, which requires more maintenance costs, requires potentially more backup airplanes when one is down, things that they were saving money on because they had this goodwill. I would expect the reality of their not great, not horrible, but not great on-time performance to come closer to matching the perception, which was imbued with that customer goodwill that will no longer be there.
That is, I want to take what you just said there and go and kind of link it back to something that I mentioned or failed to mention when I was thinking about what I experienced as a customer. I'm going to go back to the open seating policy. I'm actually one of those customers that wanted the open seating policy because with a legacy carrier, and yes, I understand it's kind of nice. I used to know that on the MD-80, an American back in the 90s, I wanted seat 22A, and I always wanted seat 22A. All right. So I get that part. But a lot of my flights are bought at the last minute. Right. The ability for me to reserve a seat actually doesn't help me because there's only middle seats next to the lav available. The open seating policy allowed me as an A-list preferred to at least be in the front of the line, and so I was one of those that didn't. And the second thing that you mentioned kind of operationally about the bags part, I don't know that they have, it's very naive of me to say that, but now more people are going to be carrying bags onto the plane.
Yes, it's a great point.
Can you imagine how that's going to improve operational efficiency that you're describing? It's not. And so the Southwest famous 25-minute turns of the past have been long gone. Now I don't know that they'll be able to pull off the hour turns as their planes still have the older bins that don't store the same amount of bags. Like, there's a lot of things that weren't coordinated here. And it leads me to go to the question that I want to kind of close us with here, and that is, let's try to think of this from the perspective of those who are making this decision. How can we get into their heads? What was going on in their minds when you put yourself in that boardroom, in that conference room, that the decision is being made? Yeah. What did that look like?
Yeah, no, and I think you hit on some of the factors throughout this conversation. If I was going to put myself in their minds, it was one, we can calculate very specifically how much incremental revenue this will deliver to start charging for bags. Mm-hmm. And that money is money that we can potentially say goes directly back to the shareholders, some of whom are these activist shareholders, right? Mm-hmm. To their shares. So they can see a return on that immediately. From that standpoint, an activist investor is often not in it for the long term. And so they're there to turn whatever they purchased, into a higher share price that they're going to then sell at. So they can see that return on what they were planning to do if they can have this operationally return revenue to the business. And the other part of it that you said that I think would be appealing if you were looking at this in a narrow way and not playing out the second and third order effects is there's this higher end leisure market that we don't necessarily get first crack at. We want more of their travel dollars.
Mhm.
What do they care about? They care about assigned seating. They care about, they often are going on weekend trips. They are traveling light. They don't care about checked bags. They care about some of the niceties the other airlines offer that we don't. Let's go after that customer and give them what they want. But to me, what you and I are talking here as a focus group of two, I am not I do not prefer Southwest today. Nothing they have done to change their experience makes me more likely to fly with them. You do prefer Southwest.
Right.
Everything they've done in the recent changes makes you less likely to want to fly with them in the future. What are you doing? Like that's crazy.
And the what are you doing? And I know it's dangerous for us to get in their heads. I think you're right. I think this is solely a team of business analyst driven Excel sheet approach, which if for those listening that are of the financial mindset, they're going, yeah, Rick, that's what business is. You're in the business to make profit. And I get that. I think what is not being taken into account is exactly that the loyalty, the lifetime spend, all the phrases that we bandy about. I feel like this is an incredibly short-term look without understanding what the brand goodwill number in that assessment needs to be and what that calculation will do going forward. And I hadn't even thought about before we're talking about the multi-generational aspect of this. Now, I could go off on another soapbox here. Well, exactly, because the executive knows they're going to be there for less than 5 years. So they don't really care. They just hope that they get the pop in the share price in that time frame and all of that. It makes me feel that they spent too much time on focus groups that were brought into the building, whether that's virtual or not, as opposed to really understanding their customer. And I'd mentioned this to you earlier. It reminds me, Dallas has had its heart stabbed twice now by two major brands of this area. And for those who are tied into the NBA will know what I'm about to talk about. One of the best generational players in the NBA is Luka Doncic. And he was the heart and soul of the Dallas Mavericks team. And Nico Harris decides, and from all reports, somewhat independently, without consulting people who might have said, hey, you shouldn't do this, trades him to Los Angeles for a bag of peanuts. Sorry, AD, but it's not the same as Luka. And the Mavericks have been shocked by the backlash that has come, even to the point that they've made even further PR decision failures where if somebody was wearing a Fire Nico t-shirt in the stadium, they would actually kick them out of the stadium, going Gestapo style, trying to get people to just toe the Maverick line.
Yeah.
Well, I think Southwest made a similar mistake here, and that is really undervaluing or perhaps just improperly understanding the emotional tie that travelers have to Southwest. I don't know that same emotional tie exists with United, with American, with Delta. I think there's still loyalty. I don't know that there's that it's my airline that loyalists of Southwest feel. And I don't know that would have shown up in a spreadsheet. And that to me is something different that that in the minds they didn't understand. They didn't speak to the Southwest loyalists. For all I know, there's all sorts of Southwest forums. Were they looking there? Were they really getting a sense of who the Southwest loyalist was, and make their decisions based off of that? I think they missed that.
Yeah. No, and I think it's hard not to draw those parallels, right, with two Dallas-based institutions making what were almost immediately universally panned decisions. And then they're trying to justify it and explain it. And it just makes it worse. Everyone's like, your explanation sounds like you really didn't know what you were doing. You really didn't do your due diligence. You really didn't understand what Luka meant to Dallas, what the Southwest brand means to Dallas, but to your passengers around the country, right? You just didn't understand.
Yeah. Yeah. It will be interesting to see. Say, what do you think? 6 months from now, is this going to be? We're going to look back on this and kind of chuckle at you and me being so upset about this, or maybe I'm more upset because of my passion towards the brand, and you just looking at it as a foolish decision, or is this just going to pass by?
Yeah, well, I don't think it will. Here would be my prediction. My prediction will be another airline brand will step in to be the bags fly free brand. That point of differentiation is now available to someone who wants to take it. I used to joke about the fact that, and not joke as much as sort of like cite it as Southwest with advertising about bags fly free was the sign that customer expectations do go down sometimes. We always used to get all of our bags could fly free. Like we never imagined paying for that unless they were hugely oversized until the airline started charging for them. And only then could Southwest say, no, we're different. Right? That was a recent thing. And so I do think that is now available to another airline if they want it. I imagine someone will claim it. And I just don't see the string of decisions made by Southwest in the last 6 months to a year. And I also think like looming over all this too is their really strong connection to what is not a great piece of hardware right now, the 737 fleet. I think that's another problem for them that, to be fair to them, is not their own fault. It served them well for decades until it didn't. I just think they're in a really, really difficult position now to get out of this. And I don't see them having the leadership in place that is making the right decisions, even in this difficult context.
I want to take a counterpoint. I want to go opposite from you, but I can't. Yeah, well, you know what? I am going to take a slightly counterpoint to you. Other than I agree with you conceptually that I think you're going to see a brand fall off. I think you're going to see it's going to become just another bad U.S. airline. I wonder about Southwest's survivability as a separate airline entity. Now, I realize that gets into all sorts of antitrust conversations. JetBlue and American tried to get together, and that didn't work. But in the sense of if it were just an unfettered choice, I don't know that there'd be enough differentiation for someone to say, yeah, there needs to be a Southwest out there. There needs to be that kind of brand. And I don't know. And I could absolutely see it be absorbed into another carrier at some time.
Wow. I mean, that would be seismic. But
it would.
Yeah, I mean,
it was really easy for me to say.
Yeah, right. Totally. Fascinating.
Well, I do like what I saw there in a comment. Yes, Andrew, I would love to wear a Fire Elliott Investment Management t-shirt.
Probably get kicked off the plane. Probably.
You might, right? Because they have that ability. I wonder if there's a "This is my last Southwest flight" t-shirt or hat that you could wear or something like that, but we'll see. I like a lot of other folks. If I got the ticket, I do want to kind of finish the flight. So maybe I'll just have that in my undershirt under that flannel or something like that.
To wear it off the plane, wear it off the plane, like open, open up as you're walking off.
Well, and Love Field here in Dallas is 98% Southwest. So I could wander around the terminal with it for sure. Sam, any other final thoughts?
No, I think we covered it. I do have one final thought. Spare a thought for the Southwest employees. Yeah. You referenced it earlier. They're willing to join this company where they weren't necessarily paid market rate to start because of its brand, and also because for a long time, one of the other things that made them stood out was they didn't do layoffs, which is another thing that they changed recently. I think, to me, if I'm one of those wonderful flight attendants and pilots who we think are part of creating such a great culture, I think they have to be questioning where this brand is headed now, because it doesn't seem like it's what they signed up for anymore either.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that in there. I'm really glad you brought that employee experience aspect into it, because that has been broken. And I just like the activist investors behind Penney, and now as we see it in Southwest, that part it isn't a concern. And I don't think if they were listening to this right now that they'd say they care. And that's the part that kind of hurts some of us that know that employee experience does actually matter when it comes to a brand. Sam, I'm glad that you were willing to pull off this experiment. I recognize now that there's been a little bit of a glitch that somehow when we restreamed to LinkedIn, it created a whole nother event. But that whole nother event allows us to be able to use this in the future. But I appreciate someone like you who has the wisdom, the intelligence, the experience to be able to say, yeah, in 4 hours, I'm going to talk about one of the hottest customer experience topics and talk about it in an intelligent way.
Well, we'll see how intelligent it is in 6 months, Rick, right? But it's always a pleasure speaking with you behind the microphones. And thank you for suggesting this. Thought it was a great idea. So I was happy to jump on with you.